All right. Well, I can't see your comments quite yet, but we're gonna get started here. So my name's Noer the boy. Gonna be breaking down two of my tracks. First one here is Shapeshifter. This one is much more of a banger. It's a track that goes over really well live, and I think it has a very nice progression through it that we'll go through, and we'll go through the sound design and how I make these sounds. So let's just start playing it. See what it sounds like if you're not familiar. So here we go, playing from the top. All right, so that's Shapeshifter in its entirety. It's really meant to be kind of like the title implies, where it's shifting form as you go from intro to that first drop to a small transition to the next drop to another transition to another drop. It's meant to kind of just be like a murderer's row of like you're just continuing the beat, and I think that's something that really helps this track stand out. Other thing also being the sound design, and we are certainly going to go over all of this. So we're gonna start from the top here. So let's start with the intro section here. So we got these first 32 bars here. So it's a very standard intro. My biggest thing, because if you're familiar with my music, I like a lot of like left field sounds and kind of wild structures and experimental sound design. But one thing that I always keep that I keep in mind is to keep it DJ friendly. If I'm gonna make a wild track, I still want to make it where you can mix it into a set, because otherwise you're really kind of hurting yourself. So I follow EDM structures all the time in my music. I think taking those structures and then applying your own sounds, or I want to try this genre or that genre, but at like a different
tempo. Make your music stand out, get more views, and way more engagement. Bring your music to life. Get Music Visualizer in every format, even for social media. Get started today. The link is in the description.
Different tempo, then like make it your own, but still keep it simple. I think that's the important thing. So let's start here at the top and kind of work our way down as we go through this. So I've got this effects layer, have some different modular sounds, little synth recordings that I'm kind of bringing in. Let's solo this group here. So So this first sound, really straightforward, just kind of, chopping it into place here, using some Valhalla vintage verbs. So one thing that I'm a fan of is I love VSTs. There's so many excellent tools that you can get for, so much cheaper than, buying straight up hardware. And Valhalla vintage verb, one of my go-to reverbs for sure. And so here, I just have a kind of low mix, mid kind of delay, or decay rather, just to add some space, add some, ambiance, some environment to the sound. It's one thing to make the sound, and then it's another thing to think, okay, where am I taking this sound? Where am I taking this song? Where's it existing? What's that kind of, filter that you're putting over a song? I think one of my peers who does an excellent job with that is Saruda, with how everything has that kind of like dusty, lo-fi feel. Whatever he does, even if it's crazy modular bass, it still has that kind of like environment. So I'm doing that with reverb there. So this is, this particular section, very straightforward. You can tell it's just, in these transition sections here. Next up, let's get to the drums. But before we do that, I'm going to just load up Facebook here. Unfortunately, I'm not able to load up the questions I was hoping on my phone and be able to see. So I'm just going to have to pop over every few minutes and just kind of see what's going on. So I appreciate you sticking with me, and I'm really glad that you're here. And hopefully I'll be able to show you some cool techniques that I use to make all of my sounds. So, Facebook is loading there. We'll just get to the drums here. So as far as drums are concerned, I like to keep it pretty simple where, you could synthesize your drums, but there's also a million great drum samples. So in this case here, it's just about, finding a good kick In this case, I just wanted it to be nice and punchy. And then you can see with this kick here, let's solo this section here. So one of my favorite things to do with drums is to try to make them as small as possible, but then still have as big of a presence as possible in the track. So that's, with kicks, I'm usually trying to low pass them to get them as small as possible, and with like snares and claps, I'm trying to high pass those. Because, when you're working with tons of sounds, like I like to work with, you got to make sure every single component is in its own frequency range, and you get rid of all the extra frequencies that you don't need. So in this case, with the kick, I have multiple EQs going on. Sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. That's the other cool thing I always like showing people is like, you're going to come up with your own ways of processing, sounds, and it might not be right per se, but you keep doing it over and over and over again, and it just becomes the way you do it. So I'm using this FabFilter Pro Q. Really recommend this. Super clean, excellent, accurate EQ. And so you can see here I'm boosting a little bit of just the punch, and I'm rolling off up top. And I'm doing the same thing again with this EQ8 after. Not sure exactly about that, but it's how it's that's what it ended up being. And then I just did a bit of a saturation boost at the end. This is definitely let's full screen this here. That's definitely something that I'm doing with drums. A lot of people use compressors. I like to use saturators as a compressor because you can see here have the output at 0 decibels, but we're driving it over 5 decibels, so we're getting a little more of that perceived loudness while we're still keeping it, the output at 0 there. And as far as the clap and the snare, once again, you can see with this clap, I'm saturating it, a lot. I'm really driving it, and then I'm doing a pretty intense limit. And then as far as the snare is concerned, that it's just at minus 10 decibels. I'm not doing anything extra. So, the drums themselves are really the driving force of the track because you have all this wild sound design. So I wanted the kicks, and the snare to be just very consistent, just keeping that groove going forward. So there's not a ton of variation in the drums here. It was more getting that consistent sort of rhythm and rolling with it. And how I get these drums to pop so much in the mix is with sidechain compression. So let's pop down on the basses here because I think that's what a lot of people are interested in. It's one of my favorite things are, the basses and the synths. And you can see I have the basses and the synths grouped here. And I have multiple different sidechain compressions. You can see mostly just the kick and the snare. And if you take a look, I got the threshold down pretty decent amount. I'm pumping it, so I'm getting those drums to really punch through the mix. So that's how, you get that nice effect where they're small drums, they're not big EDM drums, but they really, really punch through because you're using that sidechain compression. A lot of times I group these kind of all together because I think of them all almost as like the same, like they're working together a lot of times. That synth is kind of mirroring the bass, especially in this song here. So that's why I kind of have them grouped together. So let's start with I guess let's actually start with the synth here since this is, right before the drop. So if we solo this, it's the same MIDI notes as like the bass. That's the other thing too is, when you're making a song, like kind of choose a motif and really roll with it. So like if I'm having a motif and it's going to be in the synth, then I might have it jump down in the bass, and then I might have it in like another synth or a pad, and you can kind of like cycle it through. I guess a way that I look at writing music is approaching it like I'm writing a march. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with like classical music and marches, but you have this motif, this idea, and you'll kind of cycle it through the different, the high brass or the woodwinds or, whatever part. And I like to follow a similar thing, but just like apply it to electronic music. And so if you can find inspiration like outside of electronic music from like a completely different genre, and then just apply it to your kind of like window of how you're approaching it, that can be a really effective approach, and it can just be incredibly interesting. Okay, no questions yet. All right, so let's roll back in. Sorry, my Facebook is taking a minute to load. All right, so let's go to the top synth here. So got Serum going. I'm a big fan of Serum. It's just so powerful, with your oscillator window and all of your modulation. So taking a look here, I got some basic shapes. I'm upping the unison to get that kind of chorused effect. Then I have this B oscillator here, giving a little bit more texture. Also, playing with that unison just to get that width. And as far as like movement here, pretty simple as far as I have this auto filter kind of bringing in the sound. And that's something that I feel like when I explain to my students how I bring sounds in and take them away, it's so straightforward and simple because, you don't have to overthink it. A lot of times it's like, okay, what's your sound going to be? How are you going to bring that in? How are you going to take it away? And auto filter is one of the best ways and quickest ways for that. As far as other processing here, I have some isotope trash, which is going to be a very common occurrence in these projects. I love isotope trash. Heavily recommend you check it out if you haven't. I think you can get a 10-day free trial. Definitely recommend. We got a question here. Your tracks always have such a unique soundscape. What inspires you? Where did you find inspiration to build such massive tunes? I guess that's kind of hard to say. It's one of those things you just, you keep making music over and over, and eventually you realize it all kind of fits into, one particular kind of like view. I think for me, I was in choirs and bands growing up. I played French horn, and there was something about, being in an orchestra, being, with like, 60, 70 other people, instruments, and that feeling when everything's coming together and you just have that quality of like it's much bigger than yourself. And we played a lot of romantic era classical pieces, so very kind of like melancholy, dark orchestral pieces, and I was always super inspired by that. But I was a pretty mediocre French horn player. And then, so I kind of transitioned to, composing music electronically because I was like, oh, I can control every element, and I'm only going to be an average French horn player, so I can do a lot more in a DAW. So I'm inspired by that. I'm also, inspired by a lot of, kind of really experimental music, heavy, like drone, like metal, doom metal, stoner metal. EPROM is a giant influence in me. I think you could definitely tell from my music. I just really like that, those darker kind of sounds. So hopefully that answers that question there. I'll talk about influences as they kind of pop up here for sure. But as far as trash is here, I got some pretty simple stuff going on. I just have two stages of two different kind of like distortion algorithms that we're applying to the sound. So I have these two different fuzzes. And then I have some convolve that I'm running a tone. And convolve is like, think of it as like a 3D delay kind of convolution reverb that you can add to a sound in trash. And the interesting that I'm pretty sure I'm doing, so if you go in the signal flow in trash, this is a big tip. It's one of my go-to techniques, is adjusting the signal flow graph. So, like any processing chain, once you get all of your effects and EQs and stuff laid in, sometimes going around and adjusting, where an effect is in the chain can drastically alter the sound. Well, the same is for trash. So if you click this graph button here, it pops up, and convolve is normally after trash, but I put it before trash in the same way that if you put a reverb before like a saturator and you get this like blown out warmth as opposed to like a smooth washed out kind of reverb sound. So that's kind of what's going on here. And this top line, is pretty much just in these kind of build-up sections, right before the kind of drop. We also have, let's see this next line here. So let's go solo this. So if we just So all this is little bass. So another one that I use all the time is Reactor. I'm a huge fan of Reactor. It's a giant host of tons of different synths and effects, and it has an entire modular environment. Great bang for your buck. Heavily recommend Reactor 6. And I'm using this Grobian synth here, which if we take a look, it's actually one of the main synths that we have throughout here. And if we take a look at it, it has these two main oscillators and then a sub-oscillator. And it has some really nice envelope control for both the amp and the filter. So like this works really well for like dubstep songs, especially for those kind of like wubs, because you can get that rounded attack. It has a really nice LFO modulation window. I'm not really using that, but it has really nice cutoff control. It just gives you really nice control for automating your sound. So that's how I get that kind of undulating movement in the bass through this song. So let's skip a little farther ahead. So there we go. This is right where we get to the drop. So let's just play it right here. Ugh. I always love when you make music and you surprise yourself and you're like, dang, that was really that was really tight. So now you can hear it where it's a little, earlier there it was auto filtered. It was all low passed. But if we go here and we check out this chain here, you can see I'm doing parallel processing. So this is the giant thing that I can't stress enough. With making really textured basses, and that's splitting your bands and keeping those sub frequencies nice and clean. And you can see here, I'm kind of scooping out, I'm rolling out the super low frequencies, and I'm kind of just isolating that nice root note there in the sub, and then you can see I have monoed it, and that's the standard thing that I'll do in my basses and really sounds in general. Is if there's a sub bass, I want that to be nice and clean and mono. And then all the processing that we're going to be doing is on these upper bands. So you can see here, once again, trash. I told you there'd be a lot of trash. So let's go to the trash window here. So, okay, this is a little more interesting here. So let's actually turn off trash, and you can hear what it sounds like without it. It sounds just really average. And then when we throw trash on, so really I'm getting like all of the tone from trash here. And so we can see I'm doing this heavy distortion algorithm. So I selected this crack actress, and you can see you can draw in different tension points, similar to how you can draw in like in the waveform editor within Serum. You can edit and draw on the XY graph here within trash. And so you can see I'm getting some interesting shape. I'm boosting the pre a little bit in the drive. I have the mix all the way up at 100%, so this is just really blasting it. And then I have the convolve set to this this tone, and you can see I have the mix pretty high, and I think I'm doing the same thing as well. So yeah, I have the convolve before the trash, because if we put the convolve after the trash, here's how it would sound. So it's got like a little bit more resonance, and if you put the convolve before the trash, then you get the... So, depending on how you want, your bass to sound, I would recommend trying, both options. Then afterwards, I'm doing some pretty normal kind of EQing here. So you can see I'm rolling off right around 150 hertz, dipping a bit of these mids, and I'm doing a bit of a shelf, and I'm getting a little bit of the brightness at the end. And, for me, I am not the most technically minded producer, where like my biggest rule is if it sounds good, it is good. So in this case here, it's really just tuning it to your ears, getting that, just enough of the highs, not too overwhelming. But as far as the rest of the processing goes, we're not done yet. So the next thing we have here is some FabFilter Saturn. And it looks like, so I'm not doing anything too extreme. I'm just I'm boosting this bass band plus 13 decibels and the mids, and you can see I'm kind of like tapering off as we go up. So like if I turn off the Saturn here, There's not a huge difference, but I'm using Saturn like I would use like Saturator, just to kind of boost it at the end to get like a little more crispness and to get it almost like a little more condensed. That's a very standard thing that I'll do. Then I have FabFilter Pro Q. So I'm doing just a little bit more, just rolling off a little bit of the low end, just to keep it from like overwhelming subwoofers. But I am boosting just over 5 decibels, the fundamental for the sub bass. Then I'm dipping these low mids, which is a very common thing that I do with my basses, because if you want to get the sound of full bass, but you want to have enough room for other instruments in your song to come through, you really just need that really present sub bass, and you need those present upper frequency sounds. And if you hear that, your brain's going to think that the bass is full, even though you've like removed frequencies from the middle. So that's something I'm doing quite frequently. And then just doing a little bit of a saturator at the end, so just crunching it ever so slightly more. And that's kind of the main bass here. So let's kind of continue on here. Now we got the fake drop bass. I didn't really know what to call this section. It is a drop. It's like the first drop. It's just not, the main drop here. And this one is really simple. It's just a basic shapes and serum. I use it all the time, just because it sounds really nice and really clean. Some people like the hip hop sub and operator. It's the same kind of deal. I have a little bit of a rounded attack. I should also say with these basses, I always have the mono turned on, just because you're not going to want to play chords with a bass. That would sound kind of weird. So I have the mono turned on there. Ooh, then we have this plucky synth. This one's kind of fun. So let's unfreeze this and play it. So this is in that measure 33. So jumping a little bit back here. So this one is demonstrating why I love Reactor 6 so much. So this is a Moog emulation that you can download for free on the Reactor Community Library if you have Reactor. And it sounds just like a Moog. All of the knobs work like a Moog. It's just I used it on if you've heard my Gansfeld EP that I put out on Division a couple years ago. The majority of those analog sounds are made with this Moog emulation, and hardly anyone could tell the difference. So I really recommend, for bang for your buck, getting Reactor. But so what I have here is just this nice kind of like Moogy bass that I'm then saturating, and I just have a bit of not really actually automating anything there, just doing a high pass. So it's very very simple. But if we take a look at it, this is also an important thing as far as composing goes. Is so you remember with the drums here, they were very like on the beat, just like really keeping the rhythm, making sure we keep that groove going. So then these plucks are really kind of playing around with the time. So we can just see in this measure here how the notes are just like slightly behind to give you that kind of like playing in the pocket. And I think it's important to contrast, like if you have something that's really on the beat, like one instrument, maybe having another complementing instrument be a little bit behind the beat or a little bit in front to kind of, give it that like organic feel. I think that's really important. So that's this pluck section. Got a question here, so going to be going to this. I can make cool sounds and recordings, stuck adding more elements that have matching timbre and vibe, transition elements and such. So as far as adding more sounds, more layers, once you have something going in a track, I think it's actually important to look into your track for like what sounds maybe, I could like freeze this section and flatten it, drag it to the intro, pitch it up 4 octaves, stretch it out. And that's something I'm doing for like intros all the time and transitions. A lot of those crazy, really textural kind of sounds that I use, a lot of times it's like a bass or some effect or some lead that I've then repitched and warped up a ton and stretched and played around with. And I think a lot of times before you think about what should you add to a song, think about like, what component could I like reuse in some interesting way in your song? And sometimes that's a little easier said than done, but if you keep doing that over and over, you'll definitely get some success I think when you add sounds, it's always important to, I'll add in a bunch of elements and then I'll just go through and kind of just remove piece by piece until you reach that point where it's like, ooh, if I removed one more element, it would seem too bare. And once again, that definitely comes with, you know, just making music over and over and practicing. But hopefully that sheds some light on it a little bit. So let's see. We got the next section here. We have this call bass. Let's solo that and take a look. Ooh, actually, I have another question right quick. Is it possible to automate the shape in Trash 2? So going back to that bass up here, let's go up to, what, measure 81 here? Okay, so if you're in Trash, for example, is it possible to automate like this shape that we have going on? And the answer is yes and no. You're able to automate these sliders, which will adjust the XY graph in different ways. So your drive, your pre, depending on the specific distortion algorithm, you'll get a style slider as well, which is nice that you can also mess around with. As far as, yeah, if you automate these particular sliders, you will get that kind of movement. But one workaround that I use is sometimes, say, you know, you have your bass section all laid out, you got all the MIDI, you have it how you want, but you're like, oh, I just want to adjust like this tension point, you know, a little bit while the song's going. Well, what I would do is I would probably arm the track below and just like record the audio and just adjust it as you go. And it can be a little janky, but you can get cool results, you know, that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So that's my answer there. So let's go. Okay, let's go back to this call bass here. So I'm pretty sure this is, oh yeah, this is for those moments, you know, when we're going in between sections and you have where it just sounds like the earth is tearing apart. And actually what I did here was what I had said earlier about reusing a certain section. So what I did here was I exported the wub second part. I can't remember exactly where that's from, but it's from this song. And I took this section and I'm playing around, so I warped it out a ton and I messed around with this texture to get those kind of little kind of like chops. And let's see if I did. Okay, so got some fun stuff going on here. So kind of how I'm getting the sound is I'm using some Saturn, just really boosting the heck out of that low end there, dipping a little bit in the middle, in the mids. Then I'm doing just a smidge of saturation, but then once again, it's really isotope trash that's the star of the show here. So you can see I have this stage where I have this this interesting, fun shape, and you can actually go here and you can. So if you click on this bass, this is this algorithm that we selected. That's the distortion waveform. Then we have our curve, which is this orange. And then you can see the result, which is blue. So it's kind of cool that you can see how like what you draw, how that responds to the preset that you selected, and then what the end result is. And you know, once you draw on this XY graph, you can go and you can scroll through all of these different presets, and it won't change what you drew in the XY graph. It'll just like add it to the equation. So it's very, very fun. I should also mention, if at any point when you're messing around with Trash, you realize you like went way too far and you're like, oh, I don't know, like how do I undo all this? There's a history button and you can just go back and go to a previous like selection or choice. Got another question here. All right, I'm curious how you humanize hats, percussion, etc. Have everything quantized, give tunes kind of a robotic, less groovy feel. I usually use small delays, EQs, and pitch automation on hats, etc. But I'm curious how you go about it. Thanks, Alex. I should also mention your names while I'm reading these questions. Thank you so much for asking these questions, all of you, so far. As far as humanizing hats, etc., I really do it. A lot of times I like to play out my hats, especially because my CPU is always like running so high that I get a bunch of buffering and lag, so even if I play it on the beat, it will still like lag, so it'll give it that natural kind of rhythm. But otherwise, one of my favorite techniques for humanizing drums, so let's actually jump down. We'll transport to these hi-hats very quickly. Take a peek. And you'll notice I don't use drum rack, like hardly ever. I just like seeing the audio as I like drag it in, because I can like fade, individual clips and really mess around with it. And you can see actually I just laid these in, by hand. I didn't play them in. So you can see that in the case here, I'm still on the grid, but I'm just deciding, okay, this first hit, I want it to be on the downbeat because I want it to kind of give it that feel that's like, very on time and musical. But then you can see, we're a little bit behind the beat, a little bit behind the beat, even further behind the beat. So I'm like kind of going where it's slowly going out of time. And then we start at the beginning of the next measure and we're behind the beat. So it's like I'm kind of shifting everything ever so slightly. But then we can see when we get to measure 115 here, so after we go 2 measures, you can see how it speeds right back up to being in time. So I think it's important to think about like, just, another helpful thing that I like to do is I'll just turn the grid off. And then, once we have the rest of the track, all laid in where you see everything, is on this, grid that now doesn't exist, then I'll just go in and I'll just be like, okay, let's kind of like eyeball it. And it reminds me of, I don't know if anyone's, tried to make music in like Audacity or SoundForge or like one of those, not really DAWs, but audio programs where you don't really have a grid. So it's kind of fun to eyeball it. So I would say for humanizing like drums and stuff, just kind of making it imperfectly perfect, if that kind of makes sense. Going back to this call bass here, yeah, doing got the trash, got the convolve. Cool thing with the convolve, with the impulse responses in convolve, is there's 3 different mic emulation types, and depending on which one you select, it sometimes might make your impulse response like a little sharp or a little flat. So I would also recommend scrolling through those as you go through the different impulse responses. So that's just a little heads up there. With this wub, doing a very standard EQ, saturator, Pro Q3. Honestly, this track is a real practice in like repetition and just like getting it right, but doing that same thing kind of over and over again. All right, let's see. We got another question here from Andre. What does it say here? I noticed for the intro serum, you used a bass as a wavetable, the mid-high brass type synth. Oh, yeah. Let's jump right back there to the intro synth. So it should be this one. For the intro serum, you used a bass as a wavetable. Guess I'm not exactly sure what you mean. I think I might have imported a bass recording of mine as a wavetable within Serum and then pitched it up. That might be the answer to the question. So Andre, if you wanna reword that question, sorry, I'm very dehydrated right now. I'm trying to make sense of the question. But as far as, so that's kind of like all of the tracks that are within Shapeshifter. Then it's kind of like the arrangement that is the really kind of interesting part here. So it goes through multiple kind of different versions. You have that fake drop. Then we have the drop where the bass really comes in, where, that's like the standard drop. Then we have those interesting kind of dubstep wubs. And let's go to that section really quick. So right at measure 113 here, we start breaking into this new section. And, oh yeah, we got some call and we got some response bass. So one of my favorite things to do is to say, oh, maybe I want to make a dubstep rhythm drop, but I want to make it at a halftime tempo where I'll like pick one genre and I'll be like, oh, let's do it at another genre's tempo. And you can get some really kind of interesting results. So that's what I'm doing here, because it's, 172 or, halftime. 86. And so we have these really, really fast kind of surgical wubs. And I don't know why I did not keep the MIDI for this when I had originally made the track. It just got lost to the sands of time. But I'm pretty sure it was that reactor, that same synth that we were using earlier, just upping the LFO. There was like an LFO rate that you could mess around with. And so in this case, doing some very simple kind of call and response between the sounds. I chopped some of these different wubs together to kind of find these different textures and characteristics. Because if we drag this out here, you'll actually see I just kind of recorded almost like a reel of just playing sounds. So like let's just solo that here. And what I did here was I just chopped up little bits and dropped part of it down here to process the two levels a little differently. So we got, in this case here, which I particularly really liked these sounds, we have the same kind of trash going on, same saturator kind of thing. Just kind of really going for consistency here. And as far as the second layer, same kind of thing, just, maybe a different trash algorithm. That's something once you get like some distortion drawn in trash, just going through the little preset algorithms on the left-hand side, you can get like an A version, a B version, a C version, and a D version, and so on and so forth of a sound. And that's a great way of, getting many different versions fast. Got another question here from Jamie. With sound design, modular or any kind, do you tend to send a MIDI pattern and record different takes with different settings? Or do you more have a longer jam session and chop up the better parts after? I tend to do more of a jam session and chopping up the parts later, and I think that also has to do with that I just don't have my audio interface set up where I can be like, sending MIDI into the rack and then back in. So I'm a little janky right now, but I just use that as, for me, it's just something that we can sample. Other people, sample acapellas or sample things from Splice. I'll just, sample a 20-minute patch that I did in my modular rack. But one way that I get around that is using reactor blocks, which I recommend you checking out. And that way, you can do modular, within your computer and really control everything. You can play out MIDI and have it, all just like kind of play through the same thing over and over and record the best bits. So that's something that I've really moved into doing a lot of, is just like like VST versions kind of modular synthesis. So I hope that answers that question. There's no one right way. It's all, whatever way inspires you the most and leads you to just have fun and discover cool sounds. That's what you got to do. So carrying on here, got this last drop here. I was really inspired here. I kind of wanted it to be like a Moody Good drop, how he's able to have such an intense bass and like nothing else in a song and just like, just bang it out. And so that's what I did here, where it's the same wub that I've just chopped a little differently. But then I've gone and I've added some saturation. I've done some extra EQing to it. So like if we go and take a look at this fab filter at the end, let's check out. So this, going back to scooping out the low mids of a bass. So I'm really just scooping out again. And I wanted to get that nice, bright, crisp top end to this bass. So I'm doing a bit of a boost there. And in this case, it's just like, using all of these different sounds that I've recorded and created in these drops and just spinning them, a little differently in this section, a little differently in the next section.
Make your music stand out, get more views, and way more engagement. Bring your music to life. Get Music Visualizer in every format, even for social media. Get started today. The link is in the description.
And in a way that's like, if you're listening, it's a little unexpected, but at the same time, none of these sounds are just random. They're all related to each other. Got another question here from Cody. Any tips for keeping a consistent vibe throughout a song? Oftentimes I struggle with leading into a heavy drop because I feel like the section before the drop is too different. I think as far as keeping a consistent vibe throughout a song, going back to what I said about a motif, you want to kind of figure out what's that core idea. It doesn't have to be a crazy complex melody. It can be just a simple kind of dirge or pattern, and find what that heart is, and then make several different kind of versions. And the great thing about doing it in a VST is like we can just easily we can automate and be like, oh, for this drop we're going to have a higher cutoff. We're going to have more of a drive on the second drop, and we're going to up the LFO rate, a little bit more, or something like that. I think if you think about that, like, what is your motif of the song, and if you can't pick that out, if you're like, oh, I just made this song, and like I don't have something that's like that, that kind of like earworm, whether it's a melody or kind of effect sound or whatever you're leading with. If you don't have that, then I feel like you kind of got to go back to the drawing board and figure out what that like core sound is. Because for Shapeshifter here, it's that do 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 do. It's that very simple melody, if you could even call it that. And I just cycle it through all the different parts so that everything still has that kind of that connectedness. So I hope that answers that question. And let's see, as far as we get to the end of the song here, it just goes right back to that kind of like fake drop. So that's the other thing, is I'm all about like, so we had this section here in this, before the main drop, and it might sound a little out of place if I never came back to it. But I come back to it at the end, so it's this nice kind of bookend. So I think that's also something important, that it's like, if you're going to do something in the track, make it meaningful, where like it's going to come back in some way later. Something that I find really helpful is thinking about your sounds like they're characters in like a movie or a play. You have your lead role, your characters that are really, carrying, with their performance. They're going to be in every scene. You have other characters that maybe only come in during the first act and in the third act, or you have only, a character that maybe comes in and delivers like a monologue and then just kind of shifts off into the background. But it's like they're all there kind of for a reason. So find like what that reason is for a song. So thank you for that question, and I hope that helps there. So yeah, the end, very similar to that beginning. We're just kind of, wrapping it up a little bit, making it easy to DJ. It's got that really clean sub bass, so you could just, you could cut that and like start mixing in something else or whatever. This plucky synth, so going back to how I humanize elements, so I played this plucky synth a couple different times. So if we take a look at it here in this last drop, you get these nice kind of cutty rhythms. And let's unfreeze that there and take a peek. So if we and it just has this really human quality, how like, so many of these notes are all a little before, but then you have some of these notes are a little bit before, so you get that kind of, slight kind of like teetering. And since those drums, once again, are so straight, down the line, it really combines to have that nice balance between the two. So that's really kind of Shapeshifter in a nutshell. It's all about kind of, just really getting that motif and then going through some different kind of, repetitions and just having fun with it. This was one where I was like, I want to make a head nodder that's got some really, really mean bass. And, going back to trash, it's just using that, really that trash, playing around with the signal flow and drawing in your own distortion and really going wild with it. So let's load up Epitaph, the second track here to go through. So let's pull that up. So it'll take a second here. So if anyone has any more questions during this time, feel free to write them down, and I will get to them. I'll just tell you a little bit about my process of starting the track Epitaph, because I thought it was a nice contrast to, the kind of bombastic banger quality of Shapeshifter. Epitaph, the last track on the record, is very, melodic, very emotional, very somber, kind of cinematic, almost like a hymn of sorts. And there's some very interesting things that I'm going to show you with as far as the overall tuning and just kind of the sources of some of the sounds. Let's see. Josh had a question. How do you come up with one-off effects that you throw into your tracks? You know, it's kind of hard to say. You just experiment. And my whole thing is like I'm experimenting over and over with, trying different processes and different effects. And every time you experiment and you get, a little bit of success, kind of, remember how you got there, what you did to get there, and, keep that in your pocket, your toolbox. I always think about like you're going to have your toolbox of, what you're working with. And sorry, there we go. Epitaph's loaded up. So you keep building to your toolbox, and then when you're working on a song 9 months later or something, and you get to one of those little freak out moments, you remember, oh yeah, I remember totally doing this like processing chain, and it sounded really cool. And then you just apply it to this new sound. So you do that over and over, and it just then becomes muscle memory where you can just draw from all these different techniques. So that's what I use. And I just recommend, keep experimenting and just kind of, experimenting. That's not a word. Oh, look above. Oh, got another question I had missed there. All right, Dominic asked, when doing long sound design sessions and chopping them up, I sometimes have trouble with fitting them to the tune since the recordings are random per se. Any tips on getting a more cohesive sound and more custom movement during the process? Yeah, so that's a really good question, because when you're working with, modular recordings, stuff that gets, very kind of atonal in nature, it can be tough to really fit it to a song. A tip that I use for that, and I'll explore it a bit here at the end of Epitaph. So let's just grab one of these effects here. Maybe something with a little more tone. So we'll pick one of these here. What I'll do is I'll throw a spectrum on, especially after we get like a modular recording. And I just like to take a look at the frequencies. And I do this not only for modular sounds, but I do it for drums, for like kicks and snares, to tune them. Because if you throw a tuner on here, you're not going to get any discernible, pitch. But if we throw spectrum here and we start playing it, I'll just play a little bit of this song, this sound here, this effects. And we can see some different peaks. And that's all, a relative, pitch of a sound is, where are these clusters of frequencies. So if we go here, it looks like C sharp. It looks like D. It looks like G sharp. So, I mean, it's very dissonant in nature here. But, say, for example, my track was in D. Well, maybe I'd be like, or let's say this our song was in like C sharp, for example. Let's just say it's like this root note. Well, then I'd be like, maybe I don't want this. I don't want D here if I'm going to have C sharp. So then I would go in with my EQ and I would dip out, what is this, 590-ish hertz. So I would start dipping that out. Maybe we don't want G sharp, so maybe I would dip out this particular frequency. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, it says like 815 hertz. So you can kind of go through and just dip out those frequencies that you don't want, and then just boost like the frequencies that you do want. And if it is really atonal, you could scan through and you could be like, oh, I want to find, like, so for example, you want to make a song in C minor. You're like, okay, let's find C. So it's like 130-ish hertz. So maybe you boost these frequencies, and then you cut the other ones. So it's all about just morphing the sound to what you need. And like, especially with modular sound, they're meant to be torn apart and EQ'd and destroyed because, they're just like very digital, or just very electronic sounds in nature. So I hope that answers your question there. So kind of going over just an overview of Epitaph here. So it's pretty interesting in that the entire song is tuned like almost 30 cents flat. So it has this feeling where it's like not quite getting up to that note that you exactly want. And so I'm going to play the beginning of here just to get the vibe for the song, and then we'll dive into it. It's very simple, but I think it's a bit of a misnomer where it's like you don't need something to be super complex to be really powerful. One of the biggest pieces of advice I was given was your favorite artist is probably trying to do more with less. So I kind of took that to heart and really, applied that to my music. So let's hit play here at the beginning. All right, so that's Epitaph. Yeah, very much more of a reflective kind of piece for sure. And the interesting part about this is, like I said, how the entire song is tuned flat. And the reason why it's tuned flat is because of this sample that became this lead synth. So this part here where we start with that. So this, I'm using the free Max for Live instrument, Granulator 2. Heavily recommend. If you have Live Suite, you have access to Max for Live. So you can go on Ableton's site and download Granulator 2 for free. It's an amazing granular synth, granular sampler, really. And so what I did here is the sounds here, it comes from a Yellowstone field recording of a pack of wolves, like howling. And I found a particular part, you can see here, this is the entire recording. And we have this little bit here where it ended up making sense. You know, it sounded, you know, slightly musical. And the interesting thing is, so I'm playing C, but it's actually tuned to G because of the sample. So I just had to end up kind of fixing that with like the Serum bass later. But if we take a look at the actual recording, you can see how it hovers around minus... You know, between like minus 25 and like minus 4. As far as or sense flat, so it's slightly kind of under tune, and it gives it this feeling where it's like, you know, very much like you're feeling kind of like the heavy weight of everything, the heavy weight of the entire album, because this is the ending. And so in this case here, it was, you know, really simple of kind of playing this simple melody here, and it's transposed, so like the C is actually G, but you can still see as far as the semitones and the movement. And you can see I played it in by hand, so we have some altering like velocities and where the individual notes are starting and stopping. And so that also gives it this very human quality, is that, you know, I just played it out on my MIDI keyboard. And what I did here was I played out this section, and then I went and I duplicated it for this harmony layer. And the way that I came up with this harmony was I just, you know, I consolidated this, I duplicated it down below, and then I went and I selected all the notes and I went and I inverted the notes. And that's a tool that I recommend messing around with, are, you know, all of these ways of manipulating the notes. So, you know, you can half time or we can double time all of the MIDI notes. We can also reverse, or we could invert them. And with inverting, you know, sometimes it'll sound like it's in tune. Other times you might have certain notes that you got to remove or alter. And but it's just a really good tool to have. And so I created this kind of almost like pendulum feeling, you know, between the melody playing this like descending line and the harmony playing this ascending line. So you get this kind of, it's like if you've heard of the shepherd's tone like effect, where it's like it sounds like the melody is like continuously like lowering in pitch, even though it's like a cycle. Did a really bad job of explaining that, but it's kind of that same kind of idea here. And so let's go check out. I definitely saw some questions. Gonna get to all of them, so don't worry. Reza, how do you import your sounds from hardware into Serum and get them to sound like the audio recording? So as far as Serum's concerned, so let me pop open Serum here and just show you really quick, because I don't think I did it in this track per se, but that's a really good question, and that's a super powerful thing within Serum. I think a lot of people just use Serum for, you know, different wavetable presets and, you know, this and that, but you got to think of Serum as just an incredibly powerful sampling instrument. So what you do here is you just drag whatever you want. So let's just take, for me, let's take one of my Patreon sample packs that I've made. Let's just take a bass effects sound, because that's probably going to be what we want. All right, so let's just pick something there. I could go all day. You know the thing when you're going between samples and you're just like, I don't know, is this one good? Is this one better? I don't know. And then you spend like 2 hours. So what you do is you just drag in any wave, and it gives you 3 different import settings. So it gives you normal, dynamic pitch, zero snap, dynamic pitch follow, and pitch average. So basically, if this sound was a drone, and it was a consistent pitch all the way through, which, let me play it one more time. It's got a little bit of movement, so I probably wouldn't drag it into there. So that would be for your drone sounds. Pitch zero snap is probably what you're going to use most of the time. Dynamic pitch follow is if we have like a melodic sound. And I'm doing a very terrible job of explaining that. Just really try, with each of your samples, just drag it into one of the different import settings and just listen to it. Because I think experimentation is really how you're going to get some really interesting results by doing stuff, incorrectly over and over again. So here, let's import it, normal dynamic pitch zero snap, and it'll pop up. And shout out to Nasty Nasty for showing me this a while back. It was just, you can do this, these rhythm techniques, but just with like your own sounds. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So we drag it in here, and you can see we have 254 wavetable positions. And if I play it, for example, not sure. Oh, we have a reverb in one of these groups. I was like, why is this? It's not a crazy reverberated sound. So now let's solo it. There we go. Pitch it down a few octaves. And it's super kind of, it sounds really like you're just scanning through a sound, when we adjust this wavetable position. So the way to make it musical is to go into your wavetable editor. And once again, how you get to that, you just click this little pencil button, boom, pops up. And what you're going to do is you want to get like the most interesting 20 to 30 frames of this particular recording. And so scanning through this, it kind of looks like, okay, this is kind of interesting. So maybe we'll go from 3 to like 23, because that seems kind of like an interesting chunk. So I'll highlight it, and then I'll go to this add remove, and I'll go remove all except selected. So it's going to get rid of all those other, wavetable positions there, those frames. And so now we're just going to have those 20 odd, frames. The next thing I'm going to do, because you can see they're kind of quiet, like if we look through them, like they're not as maximalized as they could be. So what I'll go is I'll go to process. So process affects all these different frames. So we go to process, and I'm going to normalize each gain separately. So you can see here how it just normalizes them all. So they're just a little more chunky. And now if I go out of here and play it through, it still sounds, very choppy. And so the next thing that I would do is using the morph. And morph is just going to kind of crossfade between all of these little snapshots. And I'm going to choose, there's a couple different ones. There's like crossfade and spectral. They're just different variations. So I recommend trying both. So let's do morph spectral. And so now when we play it, we're going to get kind of like the smooth sound. And like if we throw an LFO on here especially, a slow LFO, so that, and then you can, keep processing it like you would process just one of the basic wave shapes within CRM. But hopefully that kind of answers the question there. That particular sample, I would probably use a different sample. I just, didn't want to waste your time going through looking for the right one. But using that approach where you just kind of find the best little chunks, you find like the best like 20, 30 frames, you normalize it, you morph it, then you can play around with it a ton more. There's so many more features within that waveform editor, but we just don't have the time today. So hopefully that answers that question there. Let's get another question here while we can. So all right, we'll get to this one in a little bit here. So let's dive into this really quick. So going to this wolf recording, so you can see I've chose like this particular file position, and as far as adjusting within here, I kind of have it pretty straightforward. We can adjust the grain size, so we can have it be smaller to be like... And you're getting slightly different kind of like tones that are coming out there. So like LFOing, because we could set an LFO within granular here, or we could set an external max for live LFO. And getting to start to adjust that grain size, that could be cool. If I were doing a VIP of this, I would definitely do that to get like a little bit more kind of like movement. Then as far as processing, hey look, more trash. I feel like this should just be called Noer Shows You Trash, the workshop. So taking a look here, oh, we actually have the filter. Got something else going on here. So I'm doing just some simple fuzz. You can see I have the drive turned down, but I have the mix all the way up. So it just really gets a nice kind of bright added layer to the sound. And trash, people think of trash as a super over-the-top effect, for making crazy basses, but it can also be incredibly subtle and applied to really soft and tender sounds. And that's what I'm doing here, just to add a little bit more bite, but still keep it soft. Then I'm using the filter here, so I'm just doing a bit of a shelf. I'm just getting rid of some of those high frequencies, because otherwise without it, it just cuts it down ever so slightly. And I think that's something important to do throughout your songs is, take a look at the frequencies in each of your parts and really, be mindful of what frequencies you're letting through and what frequencies you're getting rid of. I'm always looking for what frequencies can I get rid of. And that's, no different here. So you can see as far as my composition, we have it repeating for this section. Then we drop it down an octave. And that's when the drop happens, then we go back up an octave. So you can see how it's very simple, just playing with, once you get that dirge, that motif, then you can shuffle it between octaves and create some kind of interest. Next cool thing here is this little this synth run here. I guess it's a solo of sorts, and it's just Serum here. So just got a saw, kind of saw squarish. And you can see here, I fine-tuned them down. And that's what I was doing to make them match that Wolf sample that I was playing. So it's like everything is tuned down. And so we see here, I have the unisons turned up, playing with some FM on the top there, just to kind of get some interesting resonant texture tone there. And we're doing... an EQ, I wanted to keep some of the low frequencies because it is kind of a little bit of a bassy part in the beginning. Then I'm doing my parallel processing with an audio effect rack, really straightforward. We got trash, doing some harmonic control. So this is more just like a slight overdrive. You can see I have the mix dry wet at like 50-ish%. And then I got some erosion to add just a little bit of that top layer, just a little bit of that dustiness, and then some overdrive to give it kind of that more kind of lo-fi quality. And then I'm, continually scooping out these low frequencies. In this case, I'm boosting those mids to get it to cut through a little bit more. Then I'm doing an EQ. I'm cutting it even more and shelving it a little bit at the top. You can never sculpt a sound, too much. Like it's always like, just keep going until you get that sweet spot. And then I got some Valhalla Vintage Verb at the end. Got it at, 22%. Got 4-second delay, or decay rather. Well, I keep saying delay, decay. And there's all these different modes. There's like 3 different algorithms, which is really, really cool. And you have all these different modes, these different plates. Really, really fun. It just adds, some nice kind of space to the sound. I want it to be like almost like it's playing on an organ, like you're in some demented kind of church and you're just hearing this being played on some otherworldly pipe organ. And going to playing this rhythm in the pocket here, I'm giving it this human quality because I'm playing it, very unquantized. So if we take a listen to it, let's play it with a metronome just to humor ourselves here. So you can really hear how it's like before and after the actual beat. And so it gives it this kind of feeling too where, this entire beginning, there's no drums. So it's very much like you can play with that time a lot more, especially if there's no drums. So like in intro sections or transitions, play with that time where stuff maybe slows down and then kind of speeds up for the drop and kind of, gets a little more in time. And then we get to the drop here. And we have this serum bass, this main bass. And it sounds a little different than the actual version. I feel like something was messed up when I was saving this, and it's, if you want to hear the perfect version of that, you got to hear it on the album, because something is slightly up. But if we take a look at Serum here, this is another, like, a lot of my basses and really textural basses start out as simple Serum patches. So here we have this triangle, metal. It just gives it that, especially with the processing after, it gives it that real nice tone. And actually, this is a good place to kind of explain. So like when I'm processing a sound, a lot of the time I'm not using, sine waves. And that's because, especially when you're adding trash or you're using OTT or saturator or amp or, or Saturn or whatever, or decapitator, different, distortion plugins and stuff. They really feed on like whatever you run them through. So like if you're running a clean sine wave, there's not much information to like take and distort and mangle without it starting to sound kind of weak. So like a lot of times that's where like sawtooth, square waves, triangle waves are really nice, and I'll usually kind of package those in with sine waves, so it's like you get that clean sine wave bass, but then you have that sound on top that's like not a sine wave, that then when we like add
Make your music stand out, get more views, and way more engagement. Bring your music to life. Get Music Visualizer. In every format, even for social media. Get started today. The link is in the description.
Add more texture, there's like more to kind of go off of, if that makes sense. Because I notice with a lot of my students, they'll be trying to process like a clean sine wave, and it's just like, well, there's not as much that you can do with it because it's like so clean that there's like not anything that we can like start distorting and bending. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm playing with, so if we take a look, if we start playing it, oh, there we go. I was trying to figure out which one it is. So you can see I have this really slow 2-bar LFO that I'm actually controlling the octaves. And that's how you're getting those like interesting textures where at the end of those 2 bars, you get it's much more brighter and fuller. So you're getting that kind of like slow undulation and modulation. Another thing that I would really recommend, that I guess just isn't in the song, but I would recommend you trying, is once you have an entire track laid in and you have, your different synths and bass and whatnot, especially if you're messing around with like, so instead of FM, maybe you're playing around with like an asymmetrical plus or minus or a bend or whatever. Maybe throw a slow LFO that's unsynced, that's just kind of marching to the beat of its own drum. And that way, you have that nice contrast once again between like the rhythm and everything that's like really like, in time. And then you have these effects that are kind of coming in and out on their own orbit. And it could be, pretty fun. And we look here with the tuning. Also, yeah, minus 71, minus 61, so I'm really tuning it flat. So it's, it's like tuned to be out of tune. And so I would also recommend trying that kind of stuff. Like, you don't have to be stuck with like, Western tuning. Like, really get wild with it. And, if it sounds good, it is good. So that's the Serum. So then I got a couple different layers here. Ooh, we're using some amp. I love amp. So fun to mess around with. So let's listen to this mid chain here. So we'll just solo it. So that's really the heart, of this particular bass. And so we have this amp. I got it in heavy. I'm scooping out those lows because we have the lows coming through nice and clean on this bottom chain. And so I'm scooping out the mids. We got some trash. We got some Pro Q. I'll show you that. But so we got this amp layer, and then we have this other layer here. And this really gives it the stereo feel for this particular bass. Also gives some movement, because if we notice in this middle chain here, I have the output to be mono for that amp because I wanted it to be like really mono, and then I wanted to kind of add another layer that's like very stereo to get this like kind of interesting phasing and cool stereo play. And so here, you know, if we're taking a look at differences here, all I'm doing is I'm dropping the treble a little bit. It's the same algorithm, so it's the heavy. Just have it on dual. I really recommend, yeah, turning on dual with amp. It is just so powerful. It makes it sound so nice and stereo and delayed. Got some around the head preset auto pan just to get it to shift. So we have, you know, that one layer is mono and it's all centered, and you have this top layer that's like slightly kind of moving around. So that's how you get that like really interesting stereo feel, especially in headphones. And then on this top layer here, you can see I'm high passing it. Around just under 200 hertz, just to once again get rid of those lows to keep those high frequencies. Then we have some trash, which it's looking like we're doing some automation here. So going to, you know, that previous question about like, can you automate, you know, within trash? Well, automating this global mix can be really, really effective. So let's turn on that automation. Oh, and I'm doing some global automation at the end. So it's not during this drop. I wasn't sure exactly what we were doing here, but we're just doing some of this positive fuzz, and we're doing some of this cracked actress in this like heavy algorithm. And I guess to explain this a little bit, so trash gives you all of these different kind of preset algorithms that you can choose and mess around with. So really can't recommend that enough. So got some trash, got some, you know, once again, scooping out some of those mids, those muddy mids, because I find those low mids are a lot of where you're getting that muddiness. And once again here, rolling off a little bit of the lows, dipping even more of these highs. In this case, I think it was just to kind of tune the, you know, the sound a little more. And then we got some saturators. So once again, I'm boosting it a little over 5 decibels just to get a little more crunch. And then I got another Pro Q afterwards. And some people might say, you know, I'm using a lot of EQs here, so am I getting, you know, phasing? Is it negatively affecting the sound? And I guess there's kind of like, it's like yes and no, where it's like when I go into affecting a sound, I know that it's going to be different than when I started. So if you go with that in mind, if you're going to get these like little changes and colorations to the sound, it's fine, because that's just like a side effect of going that far and experimenting and exploring. So for me, it's like, yeah, I'll just throw another EQ on here because I got to just scoop out just a little bit more of the lows, you know, a little bit more of these mids, you know, just once again, if it sounds good, it is good. So that's kind of that bass. I know we're getting kind of close here, but I started a little late, so we're almost done here. So this other serum layer here for synth 1. So once again, this goes to coming up with a motif and then just like stacking layers of that particular motif. So here we got the serum layer. And this is where we're starting to get those like kind of robotic kind of growls that are coming. And so if we open up serum here, you can see I got basic shapes, triangle. You can see here that I'm LFOing externally. I'm externally LFOing the FM from A. And so we can see that we have this is, you know, modulating, you know, every measure. We're kind of going through this little sine wave LFO. And these are Max for Live LFOs that if you have a live suite, you can just download or, you know, install for free. And then we have this LFO is controlling the first LFO's offset. And then we have this third LFO is controlling the rate of the second LFO. So you're getting these slow changes where like over time you're getting, you know, these shifting FM automations, if you can see here. And you can do this much quicker than you draw in the automation by hand. You just get these like chains of LFOs and then just like play around with the rates. I like to play around with having synced rates, maybe controlling an unsynced rate on like an LFO. So that can be really, really fun. And we got just more of the same kind of processing. We have the synth 2 here. So let's solo that and take a listen. And so that's just kind of reinforcing this motif, just really driving it home. And you can see, compositionally how it's like, okay, so we get to this drop. We have, like those 16 measures there. So that's like a standard kind of like first section. And then we're having immediately this B section. And so we're coming in with these 2 layers that are just continuing that motif to kind of, build that, really kind of anthemic quality to it. And we just kind of go out and we fade out the sounds kind of as we brought them in. And we have those wolf synths kind of just hanging out, playing that same kind of motif. And then at the end here, what was kind of interesting was I actually took stems from my first track, Recon Dub, on my album, and I stemmed out certain parts and I stretched them out a ton, combined them with some modular recordings to create this little kind of epilogue at the end where it's like if we play this effects here. And so it creates this, like, we're just getting this snapshot, and that's like, oh, the story isn't over. Like, it's kind of continuing. And so that's something I recommend doing, too, is, like, having callbacks in your song where, like, maybe another part from another song makes, like, a cameo, but in a slightly, manipulated way. Because, like, here I've, stretched them out, washed them out in a way where it's like you couldn't really tell that it's the same song. But if you went back and listened second by second, you could pick out, like, oh, okay, yeah, this synth group here is now in the end of Epitaph. So that's actually a cool way that I kind of bookended the record with, where it almost feels cyclical, where it's like coming back to the beginning a little bit. So that's kind of breaking down Epitaph. I hope you found this workshop helpful. I had a blast showing you these projects. I hope you found some interesting information in here, and hopefully just kind of a view into, like, a little peering into my world and how I create my music. And I run a Patreon. I put a lot of so if you want tutorials kind of covering all the stuff that I'm going for, I have that there, so you can check that out there. And my whole thing is, like, I just want to help you level up your sounds, because for me, making music is really about, I just love it. It's my favorite thing in the world to have a song come out of nowhere and really just transform and take you to a different place. And if I can help inspire you to get that same feeling when you create, that's the important part of making music. I mean, careers come and go, but you gotta love making music. All right, we got some other questions. Just want to make sure I answer your questions here. Okay, Brian asks, question: I love granular synthesis. Is Grain Scanner worth the money? Yes, it is. Actually, so sad I actually didn't go through it. So that top line in Shapeshifter on that, like, first drop before it gets to the main drop, that's actually a Grain Scanner preset that I just, like, tweaked and played with. So yeah, it's just another fun granular tool that I recommend checking out. So yeah, definitely get it. And let's see. Andre was asking, could you talk about how the rhyme scheme works between bass patterns? How you're using predictability versus unpredictability? So just in general with, like, bass patterns, so what I was talking about with a motif. So you come up with that motif. That's that one idea. And that can be your A section. Then you think about, like, what I was telling about, like, inverting MIDI. So that could be creating, like, a B version. And it's all about just thinking of it like a communication. So, you're thinking of it like if each of these sounds is a character and they're having a conversation, you always think about that call and response where it's like, one sound, so one bass patch is saying, like, doing its, like, melody. And then you have another bass patch that's responding to it. So it's all about that, like, kind of like call and response, and every once in a while having a little bit of like a different response. So like in a similar way to I sometimes, I think it's actually interesting that you meant it like rhyme scheme, because I do think of it like that, where it's like, if we had a rhyming pattern where it was like A, B, C, B, or like A, B, A, B, C, B, A, B, where it's like that one point, we're introducing something new, but then we're still coming right back to that previous kind of call and response. And then, going to the next drop, maybe you take that C, whatever you just like kind of foreshadowed in this first drop, and then that becomes like one of the main voices that's doing the call and response in the next drop, and so on and so forth. So that way it never feels like a new sound that you introduce is arbitrary, because it's like, oh, yeah, I totally kind of heard that as like a little bit somewhere else. So that's kind of how I approach it. Yeah, it just kind of comes with time. Just really kind of, I can't stress it enough, get that motif figured out, and then come up with a couple variations and think about how you can, put that, into a rhyme scheme of sorts. How am I able to make each drop successfully more intense? For me, I always try to make the second drop or the last drop better than everything else. I feel like, as far as marketing my tracks, it's probably not the best decision, because I'm always like, I want the best part at the end. But if I'm listening to a song, it's like, I don't know, if you're watching a movie, for example, you're not going to want to, see the climax in the movie twice. You're going to want to have some development and some, some building, and it's always kind of building. And even if you think it's that peak moment, it's going to build to an even bigger moment later. So I try to apply that to music. And a lot of times, what I do is like, I'll make a drop and I'm like, okay, I can make a better one. So I'll just kind of shift it down. You just keep making better drops. And I always try to have that last drop be doper. So I think that's kind of how it ends up like that. So hopefully that's helpful, Andre. Let's see. Brian asks, curious, which Eurorack modules you tend to use the most? I have trouble sampling grooves I've made with the Eurorack because of harshness, and end up not knowing what to do with the samples besides granular, and curious how you integrate those samples as well. So let's see. I'm so bad with names. My roommate and good friend has quite the modular rack kind of figured out, and a lot of times we'll just kind of, be starting with a patch. And I think the important thing is to just give you room to experiment and grow with the sound. So like if you're making a sound in Eurorack and it's all just like super extreme, you have no dynamic range, it's just really loud, well, there's not too much more room that you can, that you have to go with that sound. Versus if you have, a sound with some dynamic range, you're leaving some room for processing later, then I think that's a little more effective. So maybe, trying to think about like, okay, I'm making this sound right now, this patch, but I'm also thinking in mind like, oh, maybe I want to add OTT, maybe I want to add trash to it, maybe I want to run it through this process, or maybe I want to run it back, like load it into Serum like we did with the bass earlier. So that's kind of how I find it helpful, but it's, it's really tough. You just got to keep, experimenting and exploring. And, a lot of times I'll be making a patch and I'll feel inspired and then I'll drag it into a track and it like just won't work. But in that case, just, save it as its own little chunk, maybe go through and, just clip little, chunks that you find useful. And maybe a year or two later, you'll come back and be like, wow, this sound is like exactly what I needed. And you'll just have it and use it. I do that all the time. So as far as other modules, I'm a big fan of Noise Engineering. They have cool digital modules. I've used the Laquelic Ateritas. The Manus Ateritas is really cool. I just got a new synth that I'm going to be using in my music. It's a Soma Lyra 8. You'll have to look it up. It's a really weird synth. But hopefully that's kind of helpful. And so I think that's all of your questions. I really appreciated you sticking around and taking a dive into my projects. And I hope this was helpful. And